I didn't think funerals were supposed to feel this quiet. There was no wailing, no dramatic collapse at the altar. Just the low hum of voices folding into one another like paper cranes, delicate and uncertain. The rain tapped against the tall windows of the funeral home in soft, arrhythmic bursts, as if even the weather wasn't sure how to behave. I stood beside the casket in a suit that didn't fit. It was my father's. We'd had it altered 2 days ago at a shop that smelled like mothballs and lavender, and the woman behind the counter kept apologizing for the rush job. I told her it was fine. Everything was fine. That's what I kept saying to people. Fine. I'm fine. Thank you for coming. He would have appreciated it. Fine. I wasn't fine. I was 22 years old, and I felt like I'd aged a decade in the span of 6 months. My father had been sick for longer than that, but it was the last 6 months that hollowed me out. The leave of absence from college. The nights spent listening to the oxygen machine wheeze in the next room. The mornings I woke up and forgot, just for a second, that everything had changed. And then I'd remember. And the weight would come back, heavier than before. The service was small. Friends from his work. A few people from the church we stopped attending when I was 16. Neighbors who brought casseroles and said things like he's in a better place now, as if that was supposed to make the empty chair at the kitchen table easier to look at. I nodded at all of them, shook hands, accepted hugs from people whose names I couldn't remember. My face felt like a mask I was wearing, something I could take off later when no one was watching. I kept my eyes on the flowers. White lilies. My father hated lilies. He said they smelled like hospitals. I didn't have the energy to tell the florist that. And then the door opened, and I felt it before I saw him. Sean Wilder. He stood in the doorway for a moment, rain dripping from his dark hair, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a leather jacket I recognized from 2 years ago. He looked older, not in his face, but in the way he carried himself, like someone who'd learned how to hold weight without letting it show. His eyes found mine across the room, and something in my chest twisted. I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. Hadn't spoken to him since the night everything fell apart. Since the night we almost became something we couldn't take back. He didn't move toward me, didn't wave or try to catch my attention. He just stood there, near the back row, and he didn't look away. I don't know how I got through the rest of the service. The pastor's voice became background noise. Someone read a poem I didn't hear. I stood when I was supposed to stand, sat when I was supposed to sit. But the entire time, I could feel Sean's gaze like a tether, pulling me back from wherever I'd been drifting. When it was over, people lingered. They always do. They gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones, as if volume was a sign of disrespect. I moved through them like a ghost, thanking them again, accepting more condolences I wouldn't remember. And one by one, they left. Coats pulled on, umbrellas unfurled. The rain had picked up, drumming harder against the roof now, and the room emptied until it was just me and the casket and the lilies that smelled like hospitals. And Sean, he was still there, leaning against the back wall with his arms crossed, watching me the way you watch someone standing too close to the edge of something. I don't know what broke first, my composure or my voice. Why are you here? It came out flat. Not a question, really, just words I needed to say to fill the space between us. He pushed off the wall and walked toward me, slow and deliberate, like he was giving me time to tell him to stop. He didn't stop until he was a few feet away, close enough that I could see the rain still clinging to his jacket, close enough that I could smell the faint trace of cigarette smoke and something else. Something I remembered from late nights in the library, from stolen hours in his dorm room, from the last time we stood this close, and I thought my heart was going to climb out of my chest. Because no one should do this alone, he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered, rough around the edges, like he'd been holding something in for too long. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ask him where he'd been for the past 2 years, why he thought he had the right to show up now, why he couldn't have just stayed away and let me fall apart in private. But I couldn't. The anger wouldn't come. All I felt was tired. So tired. I turned away from him, back toward the casket, and I pressed my palms flat against the polished wood. It was cold. Everything was cold. You didn't have to come, I said. I know. Then why did you? He didn't answer right away. I heard him shift behind me, heard the soft creak of his jacket as he moved. And then I felt his hand on my shoulder, tentative and warm, and I realized I was shaking. Because I thought about what it would feel like if I didn't, he said quietly. And I couldn't live with that. I closed my eyes. The rain was louder now, or maybe it was just that the room was so empty that every sound felt amplified. My throat ached. My chest ached. Everything ached. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying weeks ago. There was nothing left, but I let Sean's hand stay where it was. And I let myself lean back, just a little, just enough that I could feel the solid warmth of him behind me. Just enough to remember what it felt like not to be alone. We stood there for a long time. Long enough that the funeral director came by to gently remind us they'd be closing soon. Long enough that the rain began to soften. Long enough that I could breathe again, even if it still hurt. When we finally left, Sean walked beside me to my car. He didn't say anything else. Didn't ask if I was okay or tell me it would get better. He just walked with me, hands back in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. And when I got to my car and looked back, he was still standing there in the parking lot, watching me. I didn't ask him to leave, and he didn't. The house felt wrong without him in it. I'd been living in this space for 6 months, ever since I took the leave from college, but it had never felt like mine. It was suspended between what it used to be and what it would never be again. My father's reading glasses still sat on the side table next to his chair. The oxygen tank was gone now, picked up by the medical supply company the day after he died, but I could still see the indent in the carpet where it had stood. There were half-finished puzzles on the dining room table, pieces scattered like thoughts he'd never gotten to complete. Sympathy cards lined the mantel, most of them still sealed. I couldn't bring myself to open them. Every room felt like a museum dedicated to a life that had just stopped mid-sentence. I moved through the days in a strange haze. Not quite awake, not quite asleep. I make toast in the morning and forget to eat it. The coffee pot became my closest companion, brewing cup after cup that I'd leave scattered around the house, half drunk and cold. The refrigerator hummed too loudly at night. I'd lie awake in my childhood bedroom and listen to it, that mechanical drone filling the silence where my father's breathing used to be. I didn't go back to school. Didn't call my friends. Most of them had tried to reach out in the beginning, texts that said thinking of you, and I'm so sorry, and let me know if you need anything. I responded with thank you, and I will, and I appreciate it. And eventually they stopped trying. I understood. What were they supposed to say? What was I supposed to say back? That I spent most nights staring at the ceiling, try to remember what it felt like to want something? That I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like myself. I didn't even know who that was anymore. I'd been Caleb, the college student, the kid with a future that looked bright and manageable. Then I'd been Caleb, the son, the caretaker, the one who learned how to measure out medications and adjust oxygen tubes and pretend everything was going to be okay. And now I was just Caleb, alone in a house that echoed, stuck between identities that didn't fit anymore. There was one person I'd thought about calling during those long, impossible nights when my father couldn't sleep and neither could I. One person whose number I still had saved in my phone under a name I'd never changed. But I couldn't. Not after what happened. Not after that night sophomore year, when everything between us got too real, too fast, and I'd run. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I felt it too much and I didn't know what to do with that kind of want. Sean Wilder. We've been friends first. Met during orientation. Bonded over bad dining hall coffee and a shared hatred for our 8 a.m. lecture. We stayed up too late talking about nothing and everything. We studied together, ate together, existed in each other's orbit like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then one night, late in our first year, something shifted. A look that lasted too long. His hand brushing mine while reaching for the same book. The way he said my name, like it meant something more than just a name. We almost kissed that night. Almost. I pulled away at the last second, made some excuse about being tired, and pretended nothing had happened. We tried to go back to normal, try to be just friends, but it was there, humming between us, impossible to ignore. And in sophomore year, at a party neither of us wanted to be at, we ended up alone on a balcony. Too much to drink. Too much honesty. He told me he couldn't keep pretending. I told him I was scared. He said he was scared too. And then he leaned in, and I let him, and for one perfect, terrifying moment, I let myself feel everything I'd been trying not to feel. Then I panicked, pushed him away, told him I couldn't, that I wasn't ready, that I didn't know what I wanted. He looked at me for a long time, something breaking behind his eyes, and then he left. Just walked away. And I let him. We didn't speak after that. I saw him around campus a few times, always at a distance, always moving in the opposite direction. And then my father got worse, and I left school, and Sean became just another thing I'd lost. But now he was back, standing in my driveway, standing at my father's funeral, standing in a space I thought I'd face alone. I didn't understand it. Didn't understand why he'd come, why he'd stayed, why he looked at me like I was something fragile he was afraid of dropping. The morning after the funeral, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the front door. For a disoriented moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined yesterday. Maybe Sean hadn't been real. Maybe grief had conjured him up as some kind of ghost I needed to see. But when I opened the door, he was there. Real. Solid. Holding 2 bags of groceries and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "I brought food," he said simply. "Figured you probably haven't been eating much." I stared at him, at the groceries, at the quiet determination in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He met my gaze, steady and unflinching. "Because I should have been here sooner," he said. "And I'm not leaving until you tell me to." I didn't tell him to leave. I stepped aside and let him in, and he moved through the house like he'd been there before, even though he hadn't. He set the groceries on the counter and started unpacking them without asking where things went. Bread, eggs, fresh vegetables that looked too bright and alive for this kitchen. He filled the empty spaces in the refrigerator with careful efficiency, and I stood there watching him, too tired to protest, too confused to understand what was happening. He didn't ask if I was okay, didn't offer platitudes, or try to fill the silence with meaningless words. He just existed in the space, moving quietly, and somehow that was easier to bear than anything else anyone had tried to do. When he finished, he looked around the kitchen and his eyes landed on the pile of dishes in the sink. I've been meaning to wash them for days. Weeks, maybe. Tom had stopped meaning much of anything. He rolled up his sleeves and turned on the water. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," he replied, and kept washing. I sat at the kitchen table and watched him. Watched the way his shoulders moved, the way he handled each dish with the same careful attention. It felt surreal, having him here in this house, in this grief-soaked space that had become my entire world. He didn't belong here. But somehow, he didn't feel out of place either. When he finished the dishes, he noticed the broken porch light through the window. The bulb had burned out weeks ago, and I kept meaning to replace it, but I never did. He found the ladder in the garage without asking, found a new bulb in the utility drawer, and fixed it. Just like that. 20 minutes, and something that had been broken was whole again. I wanted to ask him why he was doing this. Why he was here, playing house in my grief, acting like this was normal. But I couldn't find the words. Or maybe I was afraid of the answer. That afternoon, he asked if I needed to run any errands. I had a list somewhere, things I'd been avoiding. Pharmacy, post office, grocery store. The thought of going out into the world, of interacting with people who would look at me with pity, made my chest tighten. But Sean was already grabbing his keys, already waiting by the door, and somehow it felt easier to move when someone else was moving beside me. We drove in silence. The radio played low, some song I didn't recognize. I watched the town pass by through the window, the same streets I'd grown up on, the same buildings that had always been there. Everything looked the same. Everything felt different. At the pharmacy, the woman behind the counter recognized me. Offered her condolences. Asked how I was holding up. I gave her the script I'd been reciting for days. "I'm okay. Thank you. Taking it day by day." She nodded with sad eyes and handed me the prescription I'd been avoiding picking up, the one with my father's name on it that would never be filled. Sean didn't say anything, just put his hand on my back, light and steady, and guided me back to the car. That evening, I finally asked the question I'd been holding since he showed up at the funeral. "Are you staying in town?" He was sitting on the front steps, looking out at the street where the new porch light now illuminated the driveway. I sat down beside him, leaving a careful distance between us. He shrugged, hands clasped between his knees. Didn't have a reason to leave yet. The answer hung in the air, unfinished. I didn't push. Didn't ask what that meant or how long it was supposed to last. I just sat there, listening to the evening sounds, the crickets starting their chorus, the distant hum of traffic. The sky was darkening, clouds rolling in heavy and low. It was going to rain again. It had been raining a lot lately. I used to like the rain. Now it just felt like the weather was grieving with me. After a long stretch of silence, I heard myself speak. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could think better of it. Why did you leave that night? I felt him go still beside me. The question had been lodged in my chest for 2 years, buried under everything else, but now it surfaced like something I couldn't hold down anymore. He didn't answer right away. A car passed by on the street, headlights cutting through the growing dark. Then another. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft and tentative. Because if I kissed you, he said quietly, I wasn't sure I could stop. The words settled over me like the rain, gentle and inevitable. I'd spent 2 years thinking he'd left because I wasn't enough, because I'd ruined something, because he'd realized, in that moment, that I was a mistake he didn't want to make. But that wasn't it all. I turned to look at him. His profile was outlined against the porch light, jaw tight, eyes fixed on something in the distance I couldn't see. He looked like he was bracing himself for me to run again. I didn't run. I just sat there, rain falling harder now, soaking through my shirt, and I didn't say anything at all. But my breath caught. Just a little. Just enough. And I think he heard it. We fell into a rhythm that didn't have a name. Sean slept on the couch. I offered him the guest room, but he said the couch was fine, that he didn't want to intrude more than he already was. I didn't argue. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee already brewing, and I'd come downstairs to find him folded up under a throw blanket, reading. Always reading. He'd leave books open on the kitchen counter, pages marked with torn pieces of paper, titles I recognized from late nights in his dorm room 2 years ago. Poetry, essays, things we used to pass back and forth between classes, pointing out lines we loved, arguing about meaning over cheap pizza. He never said he was leaving them there for me. But I'd find myself reading the marked passages while my toast burned, while my coffee went cold, while the morning light stretched across the kitchen floor. We made breakfast in silence most days. He'd scramble eggs while I buttered bread. We moved around each other with an ease that felt both foreign and familiar, like muscle memory from a life we'd never actually lived. It wasn't normal, but it was ours. The house started to feel different with him in it. Less like a tomb, more like a space where time could move forward, even if only in small increments. We ran errands like old couples do. Grocery store on Wednesdays. Post office when the bills piled up. Hardware store for things that needed fixing. He didn't ask permission. Just got in the car and waited for me to follow. And I did, because it was easier than being alone, because his presence made the world feel less sharp around the edges. One afternoon, while sorting through mail I'd been avoiding, I found a photo tucked inside an old credit card statement. It must have fallen from somewhere, displaced by time and grief and the general chaos of trying to keep a household running while falling apart. I picked it up and felt something crack open in my chest. It was us. First year orientation. Arms slung around each other, squinting into the sun, faces open and unguarded in a way I barely recognized now. We looked so young, so full of possibility. Like we had no idea how complicated everything would become. I stared at it for a long time, at the way Sean's smile reached his eyes, at the way I was leaning into him, easy and unafraid, at the hope that radiated from that frozen moment, sun-drunk and infinite. I slipped it into my wallet before I could think better of it, tucked it behind my driver's license where I wouldn't see it every time I opened it, but where I'd know it was there. A reminder of what I wasn't sure yet. The days started blending together in a way that felt less like drowning and more like floating. Grief still hung in every corner of the house, in every object that used to belong to my father, but Sean brought movement to the stillness. He brought presence, a sense that the world was still spinning, still turning, still offering moments that weren't just about loss. We walked through the cemetery one night. I don't know why I suggested it. Maybe because I needed to see the grave without the crowd, without the performance of grief I'd been maintaining for everyone else. Maybe because I needed to prove to myself that it was real, that he was really gone, that this wasn't just some extended nightmare I'd eventually wake from. The headstone was simple. His name, the dates, a line he'd chosen himself months ago, when he still had the strength to make those kinds of decisions. Beloved father. That was all. Nothing about who he'd been, what he'd loved, how he'd filled a room with his laugh. Just those two words carved into stone, representing an entire life. I stood there staring at it until the words stopped making sense. Sean stood beside me, hands in his pockets, giving me space, but not leaving. After a while, he spoke, his voice soft enough that it felt like it was meant just for the night air between us. You don't have to feel guilty for feeling anything else but sad. I looked at him. His face was half-shadowed in the dim light from the street lamps lining the cemetery road. He wasn't looking at the grave. He was looking at me. What do you mean? I asked. He turned to face me fully, and something in his expression was so gentle it made my throat ache. I mean, you're allowed to laugh, to eat without feeling like you shouldn't be hungry, to have moments where you forget, even if just for a second. You're allowed to still be alive. The words hit me harder than I expected, because I'd been feeling guilty. Guilty every time I smiled at something he said. Guilty every time I felt less heavy with him around. Guilty for the way my chest lightened when he walked into a room, like grief had loosened its grip just enough to let something else in. I looked back at the headstone, at my father's name, at the proof that he was gone and I was still here. I don't feel sad when you're here, I said quietly. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact, a truth I'd been carrying without knowing how to name it. Sean didn't respond right away, but when I glanced at him, I saw something shift in his face. Something that looked like relief and pain mixed together, impossible to separate. Good, he said finally. That's good, Caleb. We stood there a while longer, the night settling around us, cool and still. And for the first time since my father died, I felt something other than grief. I felt present. I felt seen. I felt alive. It happened on a Tuesday. I'd been sorting through my father's things in slow, painful increments. A drawer one day, a closet the next. Never more than I could handle, which wasn't much. Sean never pushed. Just stayed close, ready if I needed him, absent if I didn't. That morning, I decided to tackle the bedroom. I'd been avoiding it. The room still smelled like him, like the cedar cologne he wore on Sundays and the particular mustiness of old books. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand, his slippers by the bed, everything exactly where he'd left it, as if he might walk back in at any moment and pick up where he left off. I started with the dresser. Socks, undershirts, the mundane pieces of a life that had to go somewhere. I was doing fine, mechanical, one item at a time, until I opened the bottom drawer and found it. His favorite sweater, the one he wore every autumn, gray cable knit, worn soft at the elbows, smelling faintly of cedar and something else I couldn't name. Something that was just him. Someone had folded it carefully and placed it there. Maybe me, maybe the hospice nurse. I didn't remember. I pulled it out and held it, and something inside me shattered. I didn't make it to the bed, didn't make it to a chair. I just collapsed right there on the floor, the sweater clutched to my chest, and I sobbed. Not the quiet, dignified crying I'd done at the funeral. This was something else, something raw and animal, sounds I didn't recognize coming from my own throat. I cried like a child, like someone who'd been holding everything together with wire and tape and sheer force of will. And it had all finally come undone. I don't know how long I was there before I heard footsteps. Sean appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything, didn't ask what was wrong or tell me it would be okay. He just crossed the room and knelt beside me on the floor, and he held me. His arms came around me solid and sure, and I turned into him, still clutching the sweater, still breaking apart. He didn't try to stop it, didn't try to fix it. He just held me while I fell apart, one hand on my back, the other in my hair, his breath steady against my temple. I don't know who I am without him, I said finally, the words barely audible through the crying. I don't know who I'm supposed to be. It was the truth I'd been running from since the funeral. Maybe longer. My father had been my anchor, the person who knew me before I knew myself. And now he was gone, and I was adrift, suspended in a life I didn't recognize, trying to figure out how to be a person without the person who taught me how. Sean's arms tightened around me. He pressed his forehead against the side of my head, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with something I couldn't name. Then let's figure it out. Together. The words settled into my chest, gentle and certain. Not a promise that everything would be okay. Not a guarantee that the grief would end. Just an offering. A hand extended into the dark. I stayed there in his arms until the crying slowed, until my breathing evened out, until I was just exhausted and empty and held. He didn't let go. Not until I pulled back, wiping my face with the sleeve of my shirt, embarrassed by the mess I'd become. He looked at me with something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Something tender and fierce at the same time. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get out of this room." We ended up on the living room floor. I don't know why. The couch was right there. But something about the floor felt right, felt grounding. We lay there side by side, not touching, just close. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, dust motes drifting lazy through the air. The house was quiet except for our breathing. I felt hollowed out, but not in a bad way, like something toxic had been drained, leaving space for something else. After a long stretch of silence, I found myself speaking. The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Did you ever stop thinking about that night?" I didn't have to clarify which night. We both knew. Sean turned his head to look at me. His face was so close I could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the faint stubble along his jaw. "Never," he said. The word hung between us, simple and devastating. My heart was beating too fast. I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips. 2 years I'd wondered. 2 years I convinced myself he'd moved on, forgotten, found someone else who was braver than me. But he hadn't. He'd carried it with him the same way I had. Slowly, carefully, like I was reaching for something fragile, I moved my hand across the small space between us. My fingers found his, not lacing together, not holding, just touching, just there. His hand was warm, real, present, no fireworks, no dramatic swell of music, just warmth, just the gentle pressure of his fingers against mine. Just a choice made in the quiet of an empty house on a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. We lay there like that, hands barely touching, eyes on the ceiling, breathing in sync. And for the first time since my father died, I felt something other than loss. I felt possibility. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could figure out who I was supposed to be. And maybe I didn't have to figure it out alone. Spring arrived slowly, carefully. The snow melted in uneven patches across the yard. Crocuses pushed through the dirt near the porch steps. The days grew longer, light lingering past dinner, and the world seemed to exhale after holding its breath all winter. The house changed with it. I started packing my father's things. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic purge meant to erase him from the space. Just bit by bit. A box of clothes donated to the church. Books given to neighbors who'd admire them. His tools organized in the garage, labeled and stored for someday. The oxygen tank indent in the carpet eventually faded. The sympathy cards finally got opened, read, and filed away. I could breathe differently. Not easier exactly, but different. Like my lungs remembered they had other purposes besides holding grief. Sean was there through all of it. Steady, present. We'd graduated from hands barely touching to hands held while watching television. From careful distance on the couch to shoulders pressed together. Small intimacies that felt monumental. Every touch was a conversation we weren't quite ready to have out loud. Then the letter came. The college. My leave of absence was ending. They were welcoming me back for the fall semester. Financial aid had been adjusted. My advisor wanted to meet. Everything was ready for my return if I wanted it. I held the letter for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to figure out what I felt. Relief. Terror. Grief all over again, but different this time. The grief of moving forward, of leaving this suspended space where time had stopped and Sean had appeared, and everything had been reduced to just us and this house and the quiet work of surviving. Going back to school meant leaving. Meant stepping back into a version of myself I barely remembered. Meant becoming a person who could sit in classrooms and take notes and pretend the world made sense. It scared me more than I wanted to admit. I didn't tell Sean about the letter right away. I tucked it into my desk drawer and tried to forget about it. But he noticed. He always noticed. "You've been quiet," he said one evening while we were cleaning up after dinner. "I'm always quiet. Different quiet." I dried the dish in my hands, set it carefully in the cabinet. The kitchen window was open, warm air drifting in, carrying the smell of cut grass and possibility. I got accepted back to school, I said finally. Fall semester. He went still. I could feel him looking at me, but I kept my eyes on the dish towel in my hands. That's good, he said carefully. That's what you wanted, right? I don't know what I want anymore. The truth hung between us, heavier than it should have been. That night, we sat in his car in the driveway. Engine off, windows down. The air smelled like rain coming, that particular heaviness that meant storms. We'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, not talking, just existing in the dark. I needed to tell him about the job offer he'd gotten, about the fact that he'd been staying in this town, in this house, in this strange liminal space with me, when he had a life waiting somewhere else. But I didn't know how to ask, didn't know if I had the right. He spoke first. I got offered a job, 2 states away. Contract work, but good pay. 6 months, maybe longer. Something cold settled in my chest. Of course he had a life beyond this. Beyond me. I'd been so caught up in my own grief, my own need, that I'd forgotten he was a whole person with plans and futures that didn't revolve around taking care of someone who was falling apart. When do you leave? I asked. I haven't accepted it yet. I turned to look at him. His face was shadowed, lit only by the distant streetlight, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel even though we weren't going anywhere. Why not? He didn't answer right away. A car passed by on the street, headlights sweeping across us briefly before moving on. In the distance, thunder rumbled low and long. If I asked you to stay, I said quietly, would you? The question came out before I could stop it. Desperate. Selfish. Unfair. Sean turned to face me fully, and something in his expression made my breath catch. Yes, he said simply, but I think you need to know you can do this even if I don't. The words hit me like a physical thing. Because he was right. Because I'd been leaning on him so hard I'd forgotten how to stand on my own. Because as much as I wanted him to stay, as much as I needed him to stay, there was a part of me that knew I had to figure out how to be whole without him. I reached into the glove box. My hands were shaking slightly. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, worn from being carried. This was the last thing my dad wrote to me, I said, before he got too weak to hold a pen. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was shaky, but recognizable. Just a few lines. I'd read it so many times I had it memorized, but seeing it still made my throat tight. I read it aloud, my voice barely steady. Don't let fear be the thing that keeps you home. The world is bigger than this house, bigger than this town. Go live in it. Make mistakes. Fall down. Get back up. Just don't stay small because it feels safer. I love you. I'm proud of you. Now go. The last words cracked something open in my chest. Sean reached over and took my hand. Not to pull me toward him. Not to hold me back. Just to let me know he was there. We didn't decide anything that night. Didn't make promises or plans or declarations. We just sat there holding hands in the dark, rain starting to fall soft against the windshield, each of us carrying our own futures, uncertain and terrifying and possible. But we held on, and that felt like enough. Months passed. I moved into a small apartment off campus. 3rd floor. Windows that faced east, so the morning light came in golden and warm. It wasn't much. A bedroom barely big enough for a bed. A kitchen where you could touch both walls if you stretched. But it was mine. I brought some of my father's things with me. His favorite mug, the blue one with the chip on the handle. A framed photo of us from years ago, back when he was healthy and I was young and neither of us knew what was coming. A few of his books, the ones with his handwriting in the margins. Small pieces of him scattered throughout the space, reminders that he'd been real, that he'd mattered, that I carried him with me even as I moved forward. There were plants in the window. I'd never been good with plants, but I was trying. A succulent that seemed determined to survive despite my neglect. A spider plant that was actually thriving. Green things reaching toward the light, insistent on living. My father's mug sat beside my laptop on a small desk. I used it every morning. Coffee mostly. Sometimes tea when I couldn't sleep. The ceramic was smooth and familiar under my hands, worn by years of use, and holding it made me feel less alone. I'd pinned sketches to the wall above my bed. Nothing serious. Just drawings I'd started making late at night when the apartment felt too quiet. Hands. Windows. The view from the cemetery that night with Sean. Simple lines, trying to capture moments I didn't want to forget. School was harder than I expected. Not the coursework. That part one could handle. But being around people again. Pretending to be normal. Sitting in lecture halls full of students who hadn't watched someone die, who didn't know what it felt like to pack up a life in boxes and donation bags. I felt older than all of them. Separate. Like I was playing a role in a production I hadn't auditioned for. But I kept going. One class at a time. One assignment. One day, Sean had taken a job. We decided together, sort of, decided that he needed to go and I needed to stay, and we'd figure out what that meant for us later. He'd left in August. Kissed me goodbye at the door of my new apartment, his hand lingering on my face like he was trying to memorize it. Told me to call if I needed anything. Told me he'd see me soon. Soon felt like a promise neither of us was sure we could keep. We texted. Not every day, but enough. Simple things. How are you? Ate something good today. Saw something that reminded me of you. The kind of maintenance communication that kept the connection alive without demanding too much. But I missed him in ways I didn't know how to articulate. Missed the sound of him moving through a space. Missed his presence, steady and certain. Missed the way he looked at me like I was someone worth staying for. It was late October when someone knocked on my door. I was making dinner. Pasta. Something simple. The kind of meal you make when you're cooking for one and trying to pretend that's okay. Music played low from my phone. The apartment smelled like garlic and olive oil. I'd gotten better at taking care of myself. Better at eating real food and sleeping through the night and remembering that life continued even when it hurt. I almost didn't hear the knock over the music. When I opened the door, Sean was standing there. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Hair longer than I remembered. Eyes tired but bright. Real. Solid. There. I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Just stood there staring at him like he might disappear if I blinked. Job ended, he said, voice rough like he'd been traveling for hours. Didn't feel like home. He didn't have to clarify what he meant by home. I understood. I stepped aside without a word, and he walked in. Set his backpack down by the door. Looked around the small apartment, taking it in. The plants. The mug. The sketches. The evidence of a life I'd built without him, but that still somehow held space for him. You did good, he said softly, turning to face me. Really good, Caleb. Something in my chest loosened. Something I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night, we cooked pasta together, barefoot in the tiny kitchen, moving around each other like we'd done it 1,000 times. The music played low. He told me about the job, about the cities he'd seen, about how none of it felt right. I told him about school, about the hard days and the better ones, about learning how to be a person again. We didn't talk about what came next. Didn't make plans or promises. Just existed together in the small, warm space, doing dishes while they dried in the rack, laughing at something stupid, being alive. Later, we ended up on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, my head against his chest. The window cracked open just enough to let in the cool, autumn air. The city sounds drifting up from below, distant and unimportant. I fell asleep like that. Safe. Held. Home. When I woke in the morning, sunlight was streaming through the eastern windows, golden and insistent. Sean was still there, still solid beneath me, his breathing slow and even. One of his hands rested in my hair. The other held mine. I didn't move. Didn't want to break whatever this was. Just lay there in the morning light, curled against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under my cheek. And I smiled. Small. Quiet. Real. Like someone who'd survived. Like someone who'd figured out how to carry grief and joy at the same time. Like someone who finally knew he wasn't alone. Like someone who'd made it through.